What if a 1-month-old golden puppy, hanging by its tiny claws from the ledge of a 12th floor balcony, became the key to unraveling a hidden world of cruelty and courage? A young nurse, scarred by the hands she once trusted, a childhood friend, a firefighter, holding back years of quiet love, and a boyfriend whose mask hides not just violence, but a criminal underworld waiting to consume them all. When the night explodes into a storm of betrayal and rescue, only one question remains. Who will rise, who will break, and who will heal? But before I tell you this story, tell me, what city are you living in today? Maybe, just maybe, there are heroes right where you are. Let me tell you a story. The sharp crack of shattering glass tore through the wet morning air, loud enough to startle a passing bird off a windowsill. On the 12th floor of a crumbling Chicago apartment building, a tiny golden retriever puppy, no more than a month old, slammed against the rusted balcony railing, thrown with violent force. Rain poured from the gray sky, soaking its delicate golden fur as it scrabbled wildly on the narrow, slick ledge. Small paws clawed desperately at the crumbling concrete edge, nails slipping on the wet surface. Brown eyes, wide with terror, darted back and forth as the puppy let out a faint, breathless yelp, its back legs dangling helplessly over 12 stories of swirling air. Far below, umbrellas moved like tiny, indifferent dots, their owners heads down against the drizzle, no one looking up. No one reaching, no one seeing. Its tiny body trembled as the cold rain beat harder, small chest heaving, paws slipping inch by inch. It let out another broken, pitiful cry, a last, desperate call for help. Who would come in time? Elena Parker sat cross-legged on her worn couch, fingers absently twisting through a loose thread on her sleeve. Across the room, the small puppy she'd named Finn, rescued almost 2 weeks earlier from a soggy cardboard box near the dumpsters, snoozed happily on a pile of old blankets. His golden fur had filled out nicely over the past days, fluffy and soft now instead of thin and patchy, and he had a way of curling his tiny body into a perfect circle that made Elena's chest ache every time she looked over. Elena, 27, was small and pale, with fine, delicate features and long chestnut hair usually twisted into a quick knot for her nursing shifts. Her hazel eyes, thoughtful and slightly tired, flicked from Finn to the rain-speckled window. She worked long hours at Chicago's public hospital, 12, sometimes 14 hours, moving through rooms full of urgent cries, beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptic and metal. But here, in this little apartment, with Finn softly snoring in the corner, the edges of her life softened. Finn had been hers for just under 2 weeks, but it felt longer. Or maybe it just felt right. She remembered finding him like it was yesterday. A tiny, muddy ball of fur stuffed into a wet box, ribs showing under the tangle, eyes half closed with exhaustion. She hadn't hesitated. Even though she knew her boyfriend Liam would hate it, even though she knew she was barely keeping up with her life as it was, Elena had wrapped him in her scarf and whispered, "I've got you." Liam Collins, 30, had once been the kind of man Elena's friends half-jokingly warned her about. Tall, broad-shouldered, dangerously charming. His tousled dark hair, sharp green eyes, and easy grin had swept her off her feet a year ago. But that smile had grown thinner over time, sharpened into something colder. He worked as the building's night guard, though his hours were irregular and his habits lately strange. Liam had developed a pattern of showing up unannounced, lurking near her apartment, popping up when she least expected it. Elena tried to brush it off. He was just protective, she told herself. He just cared. But the way his eyes flicked toward Finn whenever he visited, that flash of irritation, the way his jaw clenched when the puppy scrambled into Elena's lap, it made her skin prickle. Outside, rain hammered steadily against the windows. Elena sighed softly, stretching her sore legs and watching Finn twitch in his sleep. She hadn't planned for any of this. She hadn't planned for the long shifts, the sleepless nights, the creeping sense that Liam's temper was becoming harder to predict. But Finn had been the one good spontaneous thing she'd done in months. A soft knock rattled at the door. Elena's heart jumped. She walked over, hesitated, hand hovering near the doorknob. Liam's voice drifted through softly, almost playful. "Elena, you there?" Her chest tightened. She glanced back at Finn, who had lifted his tiny head sleepily at the sound. Yeah, she called carefully, forcing lightness into her tone. Just resting. I'll call you later, okay? A pause, a long, heavy pause, then the quiet scrape of footsteps retreating down the hall. Elena exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to her chest. She closed her eyes, shaking her head slightly. It's okay, she whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone. We're okay. But outside the window, under the cold, sharp rain, Liam's shadow lingered a moment longer before slipping out of sight. 12 stories below, the world moved on. Umbrellas bobbing, cars humming by, puddles rippling under tires. And 12 stories above, a tiny puppy clung by trembling paws to the edge of the cold, wet balcony, fur matted, nails slipping. So, tell me, if you heard that last weak cry, would you be the one to run upstairs? The rain outside had turned into a steady, dull drumbeat against the old window panes, filling the small 12th-floor apartment with the low murmur of a restless city. Inside, Elena Parker sat cross-legged on the couch, fingers absently stroking Finn's soft golden fur as the tiny puppy squirmed happily beside her. Finn, just over a month old now, had filled out in the 2 weeks since she rescued him, his once thin body now rounded with gentle curves of puppy fat, his silky coat shimmering with health. His paws were still too big for his legs, often sending him tumbling clumsily across the floor, his brown eyes wide with innocent wonder. Elena watched him with a faint, tired smile, her hazel eyes softened despite the fatigue shadowing them. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes for just a moment, savoring the peace she rarely found anymore. The hospital had drained her today. Too many emergencies, too many hard goodbyes, and too little time to remember who she was outside of scrubs and gloves. A faint sound from the hallway snapped her eyes open. The door creaked softly as it opened, the hinges catching slightly. Liam Collins stepped inside without knocking, his tall, broad-shouldered figure filling the narrow doorway. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, sharp green eyes flicking around the room with a restless, coiled energy. Liam was the kind of man who turned heads without trying, ruggedly handsome, with a jaw shadowed in stubble and a confident, self-assured stride. But those who knew him well, like Elena, had learned that his easy charm masked a tightly wound temper. "Hey," he said casually, brushing wet hair back from his forehead. "You didn't answer your phone." His voice carried that faint edge she'd come to recognize, a softness stretched too thin. Elena's shoulders tensed slightly. "I was just resting." She forced a small smile, motioning to Finn. The puppy, sensing Liam's arrival, had gone from wagging his tail to flattening his ears slightly, a faint, uncertain whine slipping from his throat. Liam's jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. He moved into the room, eyes narrowing slightly on the puppy. "He's gotten bigger," he remarked, his tone flat. "Making himself right at home, huh?" Elena reached down, scooping Finn into her lap, pressing a kiss to his soft head. "He's just a baby, Liam." Liam let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, just make sure he doesn't ruin the place." His eyes flicked briefly to the corner, where a small pile of his things sat. She'd been meaning to ask him to take them, but every time she tried, the conversation slipped away, lost in laughter that wasn't real, in smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. Later that evening, after Liam had left, Elena stood by the window, watching the rain carve silver rivers across the glass. Finn snoozed in a small curled ball at her feet, his little body rising and falling with slow, contented breaths. She exhaled softly, feeling the weight of the day settle onto her shoulders like a heavy cloak. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Jason Miller standing there, rain-speckled and smiling gently. Jason, 32, was Elena's childhood friend, a firefighter with broad shoulders, short sandy hair, and kind blue eyes that always seemed to carry a quiet, steady strength. His face was slightly rugged, marked by faint laugh lines and a dusting of freckles. He had the easy confidence of a man used to facing danger, but also the softness of someone who remembered birthdays, who helped neighbors carry groceries, who showed up when no one else did. "Hey, Elle," Jason greeted, his voice warm. "I thought I'd check if your kitchen light's still flickering. Want me to take a look?" Elena smiled in genuine relief, stepping aside to let him in. "You're a lifesaver, Jason. Come in." While Jason fiddled with the old wiring, Finn scrambled over to him, tail wagging furiously. Jason reached down, ruffling the puppy's fur with a grin. "Hey there, little guy. You've got yourself a good home, huh?" Elena watched them with a soft warmth blooming in her chest, grateful for the simple, steady presence Jason brought into the room. She didn't tell him, not yet, about how Liam's temper had been fraying at the edges, about the way his gaze sometimes darkened when he looked at Finn, about the unspoken tension that hung like a thread between them. Later that night, after Jason had left, Elena moved quietly through the apartment, turning off lights, checking windows. Finn trotted along behind her, his little paws pattering softly on the old wooden floor. She was just about to crawl into bed when she noticed Finn stiffen near the door, his small body tensing, ears perked, a low, uncertain growl rumbling in his tiny chest. Elena frowned, moving to the door to check the peephole. Nothing. Just the dimly lit hallway. She shushed Finn softly, scooping him up and pressing him close, whispering soothing words until he settled. But her heart thudded faster in her chest, a tiny seed of unease curling in her stomach. Outside the building, Jason lingered in his truck, fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. He had left something behind, a nagging feeling, a flicker of suspicion he couldn't quite shake. Earlier, while waiting at the corner store, he'd spotted Liam slipping something small, wrapped in brown paper, into the hands of a rough-looking man in a black hoodie. Jason's firefighter instincts, honed over years of reading dangerous situations, itched under his skin. But he didn't want to overstep. Not yet. Inside, Finn settled back into his blanket nest, letting out a soft sigh as Elena dimmed the lights. She stood by the window a long moment, watching the rain slide down the glass, her reflection pale and tired in the pain. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered, their cold glow blinking in the puddles below. Somewhere in the dark, a figure lingered in the alley, green eyes sharp and breath slow and measured, watching the building with a quiet, patient tension. And in that small apartment, under the thin hush of rain, a woman and a puppy slept, unaware that the shadows they thought they'd left outside were already creeping quietly under the door. The morning light barely reached through the rain-streaked windows of Elena Parker's apartment. Outside, the sky hung heavy and gray, the drizzle smearing the city's sharp lines into a haze of muted colors. Inside, Finn was curled in his usual spot at the corner of the couch, his small golden body rising and falling in a steady, trusting rhythm. Elena sat beside him, one hand resting gently on his back, her hazel eyes distant and troubled. Liam Collins had spent the night. He was sprawled across the sofa now, head tilted back, dark hair mussed, the scruff on his jawline deeper than usual. His heavy frame, still clothed in jeans and a black shirt, took up most of the small couch. Elena watched him uneasily, heart thudding. Her delicate fingers trembled slightly as she reached to pick up a fallen blanket, only to notice something else on the floor. Something small, something she hadn't seen before. Her brow furrowed as she bent down, picking up a tiny plastic bag with white powder inside. Her breath caught. Elena stared at the bag, a cold shiver slicing through her spine. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finn stirred, lifting his small head, his brown eyes blinking sleepily as his little pink nose twitched toward the tension now thick in the room. Liam stirred, his sharp green eyes cracking open. He saw the bag in Elena's hand. "What's this?" Elena's voice cracked, quiet but edged with trembling anger. "Liam, what is this?" For a heartbeat, Liam's face was unreadable. Then his jaw clenched, and he swung his legs off the sofa, sitting up fast, his tall, broad frame towering over her, even from where he sat. "Give that to me, Elena." Her fingers tightened around the bag. "No." In a blink, Liam was on his feet, his fists clenched, eyes narrowing into thin, dangerous slits. His voice rose, sharper, more jagged. "Elena, I said give it to me." Finn gave a sudden, high-pitched bark, small paws scrambling as he darted between them. And that small spark, lit the fuse. Liam's face twisted, his hands shooting out, grabbing Elena's wrist. She gasped, wrenching away, and the bag slipped from her fingers, falling to the floor. "You've been spying on me?" he snarled. "You've been waiting to trap me?" "No!" Elena cried, her voice breaking. I just found it." The argument flared like dry tinder. In seconds, Liam's voice roared through the tiny apartment, the room trembling with the weight of his fury. He slammed a hand into the side table, sending a lamp crashing to the floor. Elena backed away, tears welling, her breath coming in shaky gasps. And then, in one horrible, heart-stopping motion, Liam's eyes snapped to Finn. The puppy had darted behind a chair, his small body trembling, golden fur bristling as he let out another sharp, frightened bark. Liam's expression twisted with blind rage. "You care more about this stupid mutt than me, don't you?" "Liam, no!" Elena screamed, lunging forward. But it was too late. With a snarl, Liam snatched Finn up, the puppy letting out a terrified yelp, tiny legs flailing helplessly. Elena lunged after him, grabbing at his arm, but Liam shoved her back hard, sending her stumbling into the edge of the table. She hit the wood with a painful thud, gasping, reaching out. Just in time to see Liam storm out onto the rain-slicked balcony. "Liam, please, please don't," she sobbed, voice raw with terror. But Liam's face was twisted with something unrecognizable, his jaw clenched, his muscles tight as he roared, "Let's see if this thing can fly!" And in one motion, he hurled Finn over the railing. The world slowed. Elena's scream tore from her chest as she bolted toward the balcony, slamming into the doorframe. She stumbled onto the rain-drenched concrete, eyes wide, heart hammering, breath coming in sharp, jagged sobs. Below, Finn's tiny body tumbled through the cold air, but then, miraculously, his little paws scrabbled against a narrow ledge on the next floor down. He clung there, small nails scraping against the wet concrete, body trembling, soaked through, a tiny, terrified bundle of golden fur. Tears streamed down Elena's face as she sank to her knees, a broken sob escaping her lips. 8 floors below, a thin voice called out in alarm. Mrs. Clarice, a widow in her 70s, peered out from her window, eyes wide behind thick glasses. She was a small woman, with silver hair neatly twisted into a bun, a lined face full of sharp, inquisitive features, and the kind of wiry energy that never really faded with age. She gasped as she saw the puppy trembling on the ledge, her old heart seizing with panic. Without a second's hesitation, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking. "Please, please, you have to send someone. A puppy. It's hanging off the ledge. I can see it from my window. Please hurry." Down on the street, Jason Miller was walking back from the corner store, a paper bag tucked under his arm, rain dripping from the edges of his firefighter jacket. Jason, 32, broad-shouldered and sandy-haired, with a square jaw and calm blue eyes, had always carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to handling emergencies. But today, something gnawed at him, an unease he hadn't shaken since seeing Liam earlier, handing off a suspicious package in the alley. He was just turning the corner when the rising commotion caught his attention. He heard the panicked voices, saw people pointing upward, their faces pale, their hands covering their mouths. Jason's heart slammed into his ribs as he followed their gaze, and saw Finn clinging desperately to the narrow ledge, tiny paws slipping inch by inch. Without thinking, Jason broke into a sprint, his boots slapping the wet pavement, the paper bag dropping forgotten onto the sidewalk. His breath came fast, his firefighter's training roaring to the forefront of his mind. "Hang on, little guy, I'm coming." Rain hammered the pavement below, the wind howled between buildings, and from 12 stories up, Finn's desperate cries barely carried to the street. His tiny body quaked, paws frantically scrabbling at the slick ledge, nails slipping, his golden fur flattened by rain and wind. Below, a small crowd had gathered, umbrellas tilted upward, voices rising in anxious calls. Some were on their phones, shouting into 911. Others simply stood frozen, eyes wide with horror. Elena Parker clutched the balcony railing, her pale hands shaking violently, knuckles white as bone. Her hazel eyes were wide, her chest heaving in broken sobs. Her long chestnut hair was plastered to her tear-streaked face as she leaned over the edge, whispering Finn's name over and over in a voice too shattered to carry. Behind her, Liam Collins stood in the middle of the apartment, his dark green eyes narrowing, breathing ragged. He wiped a hand through his rain-damp hair, the stubble on his jaw shadowing the furious twitch in his clenched jawline. He muttered under his breath, pacing once, then twice, as if deciding whether to run. The air around him was electric, his tall frame stiff with tension, muscles coiled tightly as his fists flexed and unflexed. From below, a familiar figure sprinted into the building. Jason Miller, Rain streaked down his sandy hair, the broad shoulders of his firefighter jacket already soaked. His square jaw was set, his calm blue eyes burning with urgency as he pushed past the lobby doors and thundered up the stairs 2 at a time. Jason had always been the kind of man who stayed steady under pressure, a trait shaped by years of emergencies, of pulling people from burning buildings, of facing danger without hesitation. But this was different. By the time he reached the 12th floor, Jason barely paused to catch his breath. He burst onto the balcony where Elena stood, gripping her trembling shoulders as she gasped. "Jason, he threw Finn, he's—" "I know," Jason said calmly, his breath coming fast but even. "I saw." He glanced over the edge, eyes narrowing as they locked onto the small golden shape clinging to the ledge below. Without a second thought, he unclipped the emergency harness slung over his shoulder, snapped it into place on the rusted balcony frame, and threw Elena a look. "Stay back. I've got him." Elena stumbled back, pressing both hands to her mouth as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She could barely breathe, her knees threatening to give out as she watched Jason swing one leg over the balcony, then the other, lowering himself slowly into the freezing rain. The wind whipped harder the farther down Jason went. His fingers, rough but steady, gripped the wet rope, eyes locked on Finn. The puppy's tiny paws slipped once, twice, his small nails leaving faint scrapes on the ledge as his trembling body sagged, rainwater running off his golden fur in steady rivulets. "Easy, boy," Jason murmured under his breath, inching lower, his voice steady and sure despite the roaring wind. "Stay with me, little guy. Just hold on a little longer." Finn gave a faint, broken whimper, his brown eyes wide, terrified, and glazed with exhaustion. Jason reached, fingers brushing against the soaked fur, missing the first time, adjusting his grip, reaching again, until at last his strong hands closed firmly around Finn's trembling body. The puppy let out a tiny, choked sob as Jason tucked him securely to his chest, one hand cradling him protectively, the other pulling them both carefully upward. Above, the small crowd on the balcony let out a ragged cheer as Jason hauled himself over the railing, landing hard on the wet concrete. Elena fell to her knees with a sob, reaching as Jason gently transferred Finn into her arms. She buried her face in the puppy's wet fur, rocking him as she cried, the little dog letting out a faint, shuddering whine as he clung to her. Behind them, Liam's sharp voice cracked through the air. "I didn't mean to—" But it was too late. 2 police officers, one male and one female, had stormed the apartment, alerted by Mrs. Clarice's urgent call and the crowd gathering outside. The male officer was in his 40s, tall and imposing, with a shaved head and dark brown eyes. His name tag read Officer Hernandez. His partner, Officer Dana Reed, was a lean woman in her early 30s, with short black hair and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. "Hands where we can see them!" Officer Hernandez barked, his deep voice echoing in the tight space as they closed in on Liam. Liam's eyes darted wildly for a second, his breath coming fast before his shoulders sagged in surrender. He raised his hands slowly, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles rippled along his face. Officer Reed moved in smoothly, cuffing his wrists with brisk efficiency, her thin mouth set in a firm, professional line. Elena could barely watch as Liam was led past her, his sharp green eyes flicking toward her once, holding her gaze for a fraction of a second. There was something cold, something almost disappointed in that glance, as if he hadn't expected it to end like this. Then the moment was gone, and the officers guided him firmly down the hallway. Jason stayed close beside Elena, one hand lightly on her shoulder, as she clutched Finn tightly to her chest. His blue eyes flicked downward, narrowing slightly as something caught his attention on the floor near where Liam had stood. A small metallic glint. Jason crouched, fingers closing over a tiny USB stick, no bigger than a thumb. He turned it over once, twice, frowning slightly as his firefighter instincts prickled at the back of his neck. There was something about the way Liam had seemed so desperate, so angry, not just over the fight, not just over jealousy. Jason slipped the USB into his pocket, the lines of his face tightening. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Outside, the rain began to ease, the sky lightening just slightly as the storm broke apart into scattered clouds. But inside the small apartment, the air still hung heavy, a quiet, uneasy tension settling over the room. Elena sat on the couch, Finn cradled tightly against her, eyes closed as silent tears traced down her pale cheeks. Jason remained close, sitting quietly at her side, his hand resting lightly on her back, his mind already working through the growing knot of questions in his gut. The rain had eased into a thin mist as Jason Miller guided Elena Parker down the hospital corridor, one steady hand lightly on her elbow. Elena's slender frame shook with exhaustion, her pale skin washed even paler under the sterile overhead lights. Her long chestnut hair hung in damp strands, and her hazel eyes were glassy, dark circles blooming beneath them. Finn was being cared for in the veterinary wing, a tiny bundle of trembling golden fur, now with one back paw gently bandaged. A young veterinary assistant named Sarah waited with Finn, a petite woman in her late 20s with tightly curled auburn hair pulled into a ponytail. She had warm brown eyes, pale freckled skin, and an efficient but kind demeanor, moving with a briskness that came from years of tending to herd animals. Her delicate fingers carefully adjusted Finn's small cast while murmuring soft reassurances, her voice a low, calming hum. Jason led Elena to a quiet bench outside the exam room. He sat beside her, his broad shoulders slightly hunched, his short sandy hair still damp, his square jaw rough with end-of-shift stubble. His blue eyes, normally steady and reassuring, were flickering with worry and thought. "Elle," Jason said gently, voice low and calm, "I need you to tell me everything. Everything about Liam." Elena's hands twisted tightly in her lap, her slim fingers trembling. I didn't want to believe it," she whispered, voice cracking. "At first it was just little things. He'd come home late with bags I wasn't allowed to touch. He'd get tense if I asked where he was going. He'd mention deliveries down in the South End." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as her voice pitched higher. "Sometimes I thought he was just trying to make money, but then he started getting angry when Finn barked at the bags." Her breath hitched. "I should have known, Jason. I should have seen this coming." Jason shook his head, firm but kind. "No, Elle, this isn't your fault." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the small USB drive he'd picked up from the apartment. His fingers turned it slowly. His brow furrowed. "We need to know what's on this." Later that night, Jason parked his old pickup outside a nondescript gray police station on the edge of the city. Inside, he was met by Officer Mark Reynolds, an old academy friend. Mark, 35, was tall and lean, with short black hair, deep brown eyes, and a patient, serious expression shaped by years of working narcotics. His sharp, angular face usually softened only when he was talking to his wife or his two daughters. He had been through enough drug cases to know that the smallest lead could crack open something huge. Jason handed over the USB, explaining briefly what had happened. Mark raised an eyebrow, but nodded, taking the drive with careful hands. "Give me a couple of hours," Mark murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I'll call you when I've got something." Jason left the station with his jaw set, his firefighter instincts telling him this wasn't just about a bad boyfriend anymore. Meanwhile, Elena sat quietly in the small veterinary waiting room, Finn curled on her lap, his tiny body warm against her. She rocked him gently, her heart aching as she traced her fingers over his soft fur. Sarah came over, crouching to eye level, her auburn curls bouncing slightly, as she smiled softly. "He's a tough little guy," Sarah reassured, voice light and comforting. "He's going to be okay." Elena's lips trembled into a faint, grateful smile. "Thank you, Sarah, really." Sarah reached out, squeezing Elena's hand briefly, then moved back to tend to the next patient, a scruffy gray tabby cat, hissing softly from its carrier. Sarah greeted the cat's elderly owner with the same quiet patience she had shown Elena, a small moment of normalcy in a night full of chaos. An hour later, Jason's phone buzzed sharply on the table beside Elena. He picked it up quickly, his square jaw tightening as he listened. "Yeah," he murmured. "Yeah, got it." He hung up, turning to Elena. "Elle, you need to hear this." Back at the police station, Mark met them in the briefing room. His face was unusually grim. "We went through the files on the USB," Mark began, crossing his arms tightly across his chest. "It's worse than we thought." He leaned forward, tapping a folder on the table. The drive contained surveillance videos. Liam receiving cash drops, delivering packages, meeting with known narcotics distributors. But that's not all. Elena felt her stomach twist into knots. Jason placed a steadying hand on her back as Mark continued, his deep voice carefully measured. There are interior shots, Elena, of your apartment. Mark's dark eyes locked on hers. Of you. Elena's breath hitched sharply, her body going cold. Mark nodded slowly. You were under surveillance, Elle. You've been in the background of several recordings. Not as a target, but as part of the environment. But if the higher-ups in this network realize Liam's been arrested, they might think you know something. Jason's fingers tightened slightly on her shoulder. We'll keep her safe, he said firmly. She can't go back to that apartment. Mark agreed, his face softening slightly. We'll set up temporary protection. I'll have someone watch the place, and you two, his gaze flicked to Jason, should stick together for now. Elena swallowed hard, her heart pounding, her mind spinning through the cascade of fears she hadn't even let herself name yet. She hugged Finn tighter, feeling his tiny heartbeat thrum against her palm. Why is this happening? She whispered, her voice raw. Jason knelt slightly beside her, his blue eyes steady, unwavering. Because you were brave, Elle. You stood up, and now we're going to make sure you come out of this safe. Outside the station windows, the rain had finally stopped, the night air cold and still. But inside, the weight of the truth settled like lead in the room, the first crack in a wall, hiding something far bigger than they had guessed. The safe house was a quiet, modest building tucked behind an old church on the outskirts of the city, hidden from the hum of downtown Chicago. Elena Parker sat near the window, hugging her knees to her chest, staring out at the dark, damp street beyond. Her slender figure seemed smaller under the oversized sweatshirt she wore, her long chestnut hair tied messily back, stray strands framing her pale, drawn face. Her hazel eyes, usually soft and kind, were now rimmed with shadows of exhaustion, her fingers twitching restlessly on her knees. Jason Miller stood near the doorway, his tall, broad-shouldered frame steady and alert. His sandy hair was tousled, his square jawline roughened with stubble, blue eyes scanning the room like a man accustomed to assessing threats. The firefighter's steady presence had become her anchor in this whirlwind, a quiet, grounding force beside her since the moment everything had fallen apart. Finn, the tiny golden retriever, now with a small bandage on his back paw, curled faithfully by Jason's boot. The puppy, though only a few weeks old, had become fiercely attached to Jason, following him from room to room with determined little steps, his big brown eyes constantly watching. Finn's fur, once matted and grimy, now gleamed with a soft golden glow under the lamplight, though his small body still trembled sometimes when loud noises echoed outside. Jason crouched, giving Finn's head a gentle ruffle. "Good boy, you're watching over her, huh?" he murmured, his voice low and warm. Finn gave a faint, sleepy wag of his tail, resting his head on Jason's boot, letting out a soft sigh. A knock at the door drew Jason's sharp blue gaze. He rose smoothly, his tall figure blocking Elena protectively as he peeked through the peephole. On the other side stood Officer Dana Reed, the sharp-eyed policewoman who had helped arrest Liam. Dana was a lean woman in her early 30s, with short black hair, light olive skin, and a no-nonsense air, her movements efficient and clipped. Jason opened the door slightly, and Dana gave a curt nod. "Just doing the evening check-in," she said briskly, her sharp gray eyes flicking between Jason and Elena. "We've got 2 patrol cars circling the block. No signs of movement so far." "Thanks, Dana," Jason murmured, his voice low. Dana gave a brief smile, rare for her, and turned to leave, her slim figure disappearing back into the shadows. Jason locked the door, glancing back at Elena. "You holding up?" he asked gently, crouching beside her. Elena offered a faint, shaky smile. "I feel like I'm inside a movie I didn't want to star in." Her voice wavered, raw. Jason reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch light, careful. "We'll get through this, Elle, I promise." In the depths of the city jail, Liam Collins sat in a stark concrete cell, his tall, muscular frame slouched on the metal cot. His sharp green eyes, usually full of restless energy, were now dark and unreadable. He hadn't spoken since his arrest, hadn't requested a lawyer, hadn't made a call. The other inmates, rough, hardened men with wary eyes, gave him a wide berth. Liam radiated a quiet, dangerous energy, the kind that warned others to keep their distance. But outside the jail, his network was beginning to stir. Later that night, Jason moved quietly through the safe house, checking locks and windows, his firefighter instincts buzzing uneasily. Elena had fallen into a light, troubled sleep on the couch, Finn curled tightly against her chest. Jason stood near the window, his broad frame shadowed against the thin curtain, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as they swept the darkened street. A flicker of movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was nothing, maybe a stray cat darting through the alley, maybe the wind shifting a loose branch. But then, just beyond the edge of the dim street lamp glow, a figure emerged, tall, hooded, moving with slow, deliberate steps along the sidewalk across the street. Jason's heart thudded. He stepped back from the window, his breath tight, his mind running through protocol. He pulled out his phone, quickly dialing Dana's number. "Dana," he murmured when she picked up. "There's someone outside, north side, across the street, black hoodie, watching the house." "Got it," Dana replied crisply. "Stay inside, we're on it." Jason hung up, glancing back at Elena, still sleeping, her arms wrapped protectively around Finn. But Finn had stirred, his small golden body tense, tiny ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled from the puppy's chest, his dark eyes fixed on the door. He rose slightly, placing his small bandaged paw gently against the wooden frame, letting out a sharp bark. Jason crouched quickly, murmuring, "Easy, buddy, we've got this." But his own heartbeat was climbing, his chest tightening as the adrenaline surged. Outside, 2 police cars pulled up, their silent, dark shapes easing into position on either end of the street. Dana stepped out, her slim figure moving swiftly as she raised her flashlight, sharp gray eyes cutting through the night. Jason stayed near the window, eyes narrowed, watching as the figure across the street hesitated, then slipped quickly back into the shadows. Inside, Finn let out another sharp bark, his little body quivering as he pawed at the door again, sensing the tension in the air. Elena stirred, sitting up groggily, her pale face blinking in confusion, as Jason moved quickly to her side. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Jason crouched beside her, his large hands gently resting on her shoulders. "It's okay, Elle. We're safe. Just stay with Finn, all right?" Elena clutched Finn close, burying her face in his soft fur, as Jason rose, muscles taut, eyes flicking back to the window. Outside, Dana's team swept the street, but Jason's gut told him this was only the beginning. The air inside the safe house had grown tense, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Elena Parker sat on the worn couch, Finn cradled tightly in her arms, the small golden retriever's soft golden fur pressed against her tear-damp cheek. Her hazel eyes, still wide with exhaustion and fear, darted toward Jason Miller, who stood near the door with his broad back straight, his blue eyes sharp and unblinking as he listened to the night outside. Jason's square jaw was set, the stubble along his chin catching the dim light, his sandy hair slightly damp with sweat despite the cool air. Elena whispered softly, her voice trembling. "Do you hear something?" Finn stirred in her arms, his small ears perking up, his tiny body going stiff as a low, uncertain growl rumbled in his chest. Jason raised one hand slightly, motioning her to stay silent, his firefighter instincts flaring as his sharp gaze moved to the window. He had sensed it too, a disturbance, a shift in the night air, something darker moving through the shadows. Suddenly a loud crash shattered the silence. The front door rattled violently on its hinges. Jason spun around, muscles taut, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Elle, back door, now!" he hissed, voice low but commanding. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. Clutching Finn tightly, she scrambled up, her slender frame trembling as she followed Jason toward the kitchen. Her long, chestnut hair whipped behind her as she ran, her pale face flushed with panic. The back hallway was narrow, lined with peeling paint and faintly flickering lights. As they ran, Jason glanced back over his shoulder just in time to see the front door splinter open, dark figures flooding inside, men in black hoodies, faces masked, their movements sharp and coordinated. Jason shoved open the back exit, his strong hand steady despite the chaos erupting behind them. Outside, the cold night air hit them like a slap, and Elena gasped, cradling Finn closer as she stumbled out into the alley. "Stay with me, Elle," Jason urged, his deep voice firm, his large frame shielding her as they ran, the sound of hurried footsteps closing in behind them. Finn squirmed slightly in Elena's arms, letting out a sharp bark, his tiny body shaking as he sensed the danger pressing down. Elena fought back a sob, forcing herself to keep running, her slender legs burning with effort. Suddenly, flashing blue and red lights erupted at the end of the alley, sirens wailing as police vehicles swarmed the narrow streets. Officers in dark uniforms poured out, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding as they surrounded the building. Jason slowed, turning just enough to glance at Elena, his square jaw tight, his blue eyes softening for just a moment. "We made it, Elle," he murmured, his voice thick with relief. "We're okay." But as he turned back, one of the masked men lunged from the shadows, slamming into Jason with bone-jarring force. Elena screamed, stumbling back as Jason twisted, grappling with the attacker, his strong arms straining as they crashed against the alley wall. Jason's breath came in ragged bursts, his muscles burning as he fought, fists landing sharp, desperate blows. The attacker swung wildly, a gleam of metal flashing briefly, but Jason ducked, driving his shoulder forward with trained precision, slamming the man backward. Elena watched in horror, her heart in her throat, Finn trembling wildly in her arms as the fight surged forward, rough and chaotic. Then, suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the night. Officers surged forward, pinning the masked man to the ground, cuffs snapping into place. More officers stormed the safe house, shouts and crashes echoing as they cornered the remaining criminals, weapons drawn. Elena dropped to her knees, gasping, her arms tightening around Finn as tears spilled freely down her face. She rocked gently, whispering soft, trembling reassurances into Finn's fur, the tiny puppy letting out faint, exhausted whimpers. Jason stumbled slightly, his chest heaving, a faint gash blooming red along his upper arm where the attacker's knife had grazed him. But he was smiling, a faint, tired grin curling at the edges of his mouth as he dropped down beside Elena, his large hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "We're safe now, Elle," Jason murmured softly, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners despite the pain. "It's over." Elena let out a broken sob, throwing her arms around Jason, clutching both him and Finn tightly as her whole body shook. "Thank you," she whispered over and over, her voice raw with gratitude and relief. All around them, police officers moved in swift, coordinated lines, cuffing the last of Liam's men, gathering evidence, including the USB that Jason had delivered, which had provided crucial details on the gang's locations and drug routes. Officer Dana Reed approached, her lean figure moving briskly as she offered Jason a tight, approving nod. "Good work, Miller," she said, her sharp gray eyes softening slightly as she glanced at Elena. "We've got them. All of them." Jason exhaled slowly, his hand tightening briefly on Elena's shoulder before he leaned back, wincing slightly as the pain in his arm flared again. Elena, her hazel eyes glistening with tears, reached up to touch his face lightly, her fingers trembling. "You saved us?" she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. Jason gave a faint, tired laugh, his eyes warm. "Nah," he murmured softly. "Finn saved us. I was just backup." Finn, nestled between them, let out a soft, sleepy huff, his tiny tail thumping faintly against the ground as he pressed closer, his little golden body finally, completely safe. The late afternoon sun stretched its golden fingers across the quiet Chicago park, casting long, soft shadows over the benches and winding paths. Elena Parker sat with her legs curled on a wooden bench, her slender figure relaxed for the first time in months. Her chestnut brown hair fell loosely over her shoulders, gleaming faintly in the gentle light. Her hazel eyes, once clouded with exhaustion and fear, now sparkled with something warmer. Quiet peace, a fragile but real happiness. Beside her, Jason Miller leaned back against the bench, his broad shoulders slightly slouched in comfort, one strong arm resting along the back behind Elena. His sandy hair caught the sun's glow, his square-jawed face relaxed, though a faint scar still marked the edge of his upper arm where the knife had grazed him that night. His blue eyes, usually sharp and alert, softened whenever they drifted to Elena or the small golden bundle sprawled happily at their feet. Finn, now several months old, had grown into a sturdy, energetic golden retriever. His once tiny legs had filled out into strong, confident paws, his golden coat thick and gleaming. He stretched lazily on the grass, his head pillowed on Jason's boot, his pink tongue lolling out as he panted contentedly. Finn's brown eyes were half-lidded in bliss, his tail giving the occasional sleepy wag as the warm breeze rippled through the park. Elena let out a soft laugh, brushing her fingers lightly through Finn's silky fur. "Look at him," she murmured. "He's so spoiled now." Jason chuckled, his deep voice rumbling with amusement. "You mean we're the ones spoiled? He keeps us moving, keeps us smiling." Elena smiled softly, leaning her head lightly against Jason's shoulder. They sat there for a long moment. No need for words, letting the sounds of the park drift around them. Distant laughter of children, the faint rustle of wind in the trees, the occasional chirp of birds settling into the evening. Nearby, Sarah, the veterinary assistant who had cared for Finn after his injury, strolled by with her own dog, a wiry little terrier with scruffy black and white fur. Sarah was a petite woman in her late 20s, with a cascade of auburn curls pulled into a loose ponytail and a dusting of freckles across her fair skin. She waved cheerfully at Elena and Jason, her brown eyes warm and bright. "You three look perfect," Sarah called teasingly. "Careful, Jason, you're setting the bar too high for the rest of us." Jason laughed, raising a hand in a casual wave. "Hey, don't jinx it, Sarah." Sarah grinned, giving Finn a playful salute before continuing down the path, her little terrier prancing beside her. Elena watched her go, then turned back to Jason, her smile softening. "I never thought we'd get here," she whispered, "after everything." Jason's blue eyes met hers, steady and sure. "We did," he murmured. "We're here now. That's what matters." Elena exhaled slowly, feeling the last weight of old fear ease from her shoulders. She leaned fully into Jason's side, closing her eyes as his arm curled gently around her, holding her close. Finn shifted at their feet, letting out a long, satisfied sigh, his paws twitching slightly as he drifted into a light nap. There was no need for grand promises, no speeches or declarations. No one spoke of proposals or forever or binding words. It was enough, more than enough, that they had found each other again, rebuilt something whole from the broken pieces left behind. Three hearts, beaten but unbowed, sitting quietly in the fading light, breathing in the peace they had fought so hard to reach. As the sun dipped lower, casting the sky into soft pinks and oranges, Elena tilted her head up, pressing a light kiss to Jason's cheek. He smiled, tightening his arm just slightly around her. Finn, sensing the movement, lifted his head, blinking sleepily, his tail thumping once, twice, before he sprawled out again with a faint groan of puppy satisfaction. Elena let out a soft laugh. "I think he knows he's got us wrapped around his paw." Jason chuckled, his blue eyes crinkling warmly. "Good," he murmured, "because I'm not letting either of you go." They sat together on that old wooden bench, under the soft hues of the evening sky, a small family bound not by promises or rings, but by the simple, fierce truth of survival, trust, and love rediscovered. And as the city around them hummed on, Jason, Elena, and Finn leaned into one another, ready to face whatever came next, together. Sometimes, life gives us cracks so deep we think no light can ever reach through. But maybe, just maybe, those cracks are where the miracles slip in. Elena, Jason, and Finn's journey wasn't one of fairy tale magic or perfect scripted endings. It was a story of broken hearts, battered trust, and a quiet, steady kind of healing. A story that reminds us that even after the storm, even after the darkest nights, there can still be a dawn. Maybe that's God's hand, working softly in the corners of our lives. Maybe it's His whisper in the laughter of a friend, the warmth of a small dog's body curled against yours, the steady arm of someone who doesn't let you fall. Maybe every ordinary day holds a little of His extraordinary love, if we dare to see it. So if you're watching this now, know this. You are part of that miracle too. You are part of this circle of light. And from the bottom of our hearts, we pray that God blesses you tonight and always, that He keeps you safe, lifts you when you stumble, and fills your life with small, beautiful reminders that you are never, ever alone. If this story touched you, please share it. Leave us a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us about the miracles in your own life. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing you more stories of hope, healing, and the quiet power of love. May God bless you, keep you, and remind you today, Even the smallest heart can carry a light big enough to change the world.